The galaxy was burning and nobody cared about the rules anymore. The war between the Galactic Coalition and humanity had been going on for so long that most soldiers couldn't even remember why it started in the first place. They just knew one thing: humans were the enemy and enemies didn't deserve mercy. Vexthor had been fighting in this war for nearly 2 decades. He was a dragon, one of the ancient warrior species that formed the backbone of the Coalition's military might. His scales were dark as midnight, scarred from 1,000 battles, and his eyes held the kind of weariness that came from seeing too much death. He destroyed human outposts, burned their ships, and never once questioned his orders. That's what good soldiers did. They followed commands and kept the galaxy safe from the human threat. But everything changed on a Tuesday morning on the edge of Coalition space. Vexthor was on routine patrol near Thessera 9, a contested moon that had changed hands 17 times during the war. The latest battle had ended just 3 days ago, leaving behind the usual mess. Burning wreckage, scattered debris, and the acrid smell of destroyed ships hung in the air. His job was simple: search for survivors and make sure no humans were hiding in the ruins waiting to strike back. He'd been walking through the twisted remains of a human colony transport for about an hour when he heard it. At first he thought it was just the wind whistling through broken metal. But then he heard it again, clearer this time. A sound that made his blood run cold, not from fear but from something else entirely. Something he couldn't quite name. It was crying. A baby's cry. Vexthor stopped dead in his tracks. That couldn't be right. The attack had happened 3 days ago. Nothing could survive that long in this wreckage without food, water, or shelter. Especially not an infant. He should just keep walking, finish his patrol, and file his report. But his feet wouldn't move. The crying continued, weak and desperate, coming from somewhere beneath a collapsed section of the ship's cargo bay. Against every instinct of self-preservation and military discipline, Vexthor started digging. His massive claws tore through metal sheets and support beams like they were paper. The crying grew louder, more insistent. Someone was definitely alive down there, and they were running out of time. It took him 20 minutes to clear enough debris to reach the source of the sound. What he found made him freeze completely. Nestled inside an emergency life pod, wrapped in a thermal blanket that had somehow kept functioning, was a human baby. The infant couldn't have been more than a few days old, with a thin layer of dark hair and tiny fists that waved aimlessly in the air. The child's face was red from crying, but otherwise the baby looked completely unharmed. Vexthor's hand hovered over the infant, his claws extended. He knew what he was supposed to do. Coalition law was crystal clear on this matter. Any human, regardless of age, was a potential threat to galactic peace and had to be eliminated. No exceptions. No mercy. It was the rule that kept the Coalition safe, the rule that had been drilled into him since his first day of training. But as his claw moved closer, something impossible happened. The baby stopped crying and looked directly at him. Those tiny eyes, still unfocused and new to the world, seemed to stare right into his soul. And then the infant did something that shattered every wall Vexthor had built around his heart over 2 decades of war. The baby smiled. Not a scared grimace or a frightened whimper, but a genuine, innocent smile. Then those impossibly small fingers reached up and touched the tip of his snout, wrapping around his scaled nose with a grip that was surprisingly strong for something so fragile. In that single moment, everything Vexthor thought he knew about the universe collapsed. This wasn't a threat. This wasn't a future soldier or a weapon waiting to be deployed. This was just a child, completely helpless and utterly trusting. The baby had no idea what species Vexthor was, no concept of war or enemies or hatred. All this infant knew was that someone was there and that someone might help. Vexthor's training screamed at him to finish the mission. His logical mind listed a dozen reasons why leaving the child alive was dangerous, stupid, and treasonous. But his hand, moving on its own, carefully scooped the baby up instead. The infant weighed almost nothing, fitting easily in his palm. The child cooed softly, apparently delighted by this new development, and nestled against the warm scales of his arm. That's when Vexthor made the decision that would change the course of galactic history. He opened a compartment in his armored chest plating, a space normally used for carrying emergency supplies, and gently placed the baby inside. The infant settled immediately, warm and safe against his body heat. Without looking back, without filing a report, without saying goodbye to the military career he'd dedicated his entire life to, Vexthor turned away from his patrol route and headed toward the deep wilderness of Thessera 9. He was now a deserter, a traitor to the Coalition, and a criminal by every law that governed civilized space. But as he felt the tiny heartbeat against his chest, none of that seemed to matter anymore. 7 years had passed since that fateful day in the ruins, and Vex Thor still couldn't believe how much his life had changed. The cave system he'd found deep in Thessera 9's crystal forests had become home, a place so remote that coalition patrols never ventured near it. The glowing blue crystals that grew from every surface provided enough light to see by, and an underground stream supplied fresh water. It wasn't much, but it was safe. That was all that mattered. He'd named the child Lily, after a flower mentioned in one of the human data files he'd recovered from the wreckage. It seemed fitting somehow, a name that represented something delicate yet resilient. And resilient she certainly was. That tiny infant who'd fit in his palm had grown into a curious, energetic girl who never seemed to run out of questions. Lily was sitting cross-legged on a flat crystal formation now, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, completely focused on the holographic display floating in front of her. She'd found an old educational tablet 3 months ago during one of their carefully planned scavenging trips to abandoned human sites, and she'd been obsessed with it ever since. Vex Thor watched her mouth the words as she read, her finger tracing the alien script that she was teaching herself to understand. Vex, she called out, using the shortened name she'd given him when she was too young to pronounce his full title. It says here that humans used to have something called schools where lots of children learned together. Did you have schools? Vex Thor looked up from the fish he was cleaning for their dinner. We did. Training academies where young dragons learned combat, history, and honor codes. Though I doubt they were as fun as your human schools sounded. I bet they weren't, Lily said with a grin. This tablet says human kids played games during something called recess. They had friends and told jokes and traded snacks. That sounds amazing. There was a longing in her voice that made Vex Thor's heart ache. She'd never known another human being besides what she learned from salvaged recordings and files. She'd never had a friend her own age, never played the games other children played, never experienced the simple joy of belonging to a community. All she had was a dragon living in a cave, teaching her whatever he could remember from his own education and whatever they could scavenge from the ruins of her people's civilization. Tell me again why the war started, Lily asked suddenly, closing the tablet and turning to face him. This was a question she asked often, and each time Vex Thor struggled to find a better answer. He set down the fish and moved closer, settling his massive form on the cave floor beside her. The official coalition story is that humans were expanding too aggressively, taking resources that belonged to other species, and refusing to follow galactic laws. They said humanity was dangerous and needed to be controlled before they threatened everyone. But you don't believe that anymore, do you? Vex Thor sighed, smoke curling from his nostrils. No, little one. I don't. The more I learn from the human records we've found, the more I see a different picture. I see a species that was new to galactic politics, making mistakes perhaps, but not malicious ones. I see coalition members who wanted Earth's resources and used fear to justify taking them. I see politicians on both sides who chose pride over peace. Lily was quiet for a moment, processing this. At 7 years old, she had a wisdom that unsettled him sometimes. Growing up between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, had given her a perspective that few beings in the galaxy possessed. I've been reading about human history, she said softly. They fought wars among themselves too. Terrible ones. But they also did something else. They forgave each other eventually. They built peace even when it seemed impossible. Countries that were bitter enemies became friends. Do you think that could happen with a coalition? I don't know, Vex Thor admitted. But I hope so. For your sake, I hope so. Their conversation was interrupted by a rumbling sound from deeper in the cave system. Lily jumped to her feet immediately, her hand instinctively reaching for the energy blade Vex Thor had modified for her smaller grip. She'd been training with it since she was 5, and her reflexes were already impressive. She had to be ready for anything out here in the wilderness. But it was just a rock slide, nothing dangerous. Still, the incident reminded Vex Thor of how precarious their existence really was. Lily was growing up wild, learning to hunt and fight and survive in conditions that would break most adults. She could track animals through the crystal forests, identify edible plants from poisonous ones, and move through the terrain with barely a sound. She spoke 3 languages fluently, human English, the coalition common tongue, and the ancient dragon speech that few even among his own people still knew. Yet for all her survival skills, she was still just a child. She still laughed at silly jokes, still made up stories about the crystal formations being frozen castles from an ancient kingdom, still needed comfort after nightmares about the parents she'd never known. Vex Thor would find her curled against his side in the mornings, seeking warmth and security from the only family she'd ever had. Vex, Lily said one evening as they watched the twin moons rise over the crystal forest. If the coalition ever found us, what would happen? He'd been dreading this question. They would take you away from me. They would likely execute you as they were ordered to do 7 years ago. And they would punish me for treason. Then we'll just have to make sure they never find us, she said with a determination that was heartbreaking in someone so young. But Vexthor knew the truth that Lily was still too innocent to fully grasp. They couldn't hide forever. Eventually their luck would run out. The Coalition's search patterns were thorough, and deserters were never truly forgotten. Sooner or later, someone would track the energy signatures from their cave, or spot them during a scavenging run, or simply stumble upon them by accident. When that day came, Vexthor had already decided what he would do. He would fight with everything he had to protect the child who'd taught him that mercy was stronger than duty, that love was more powerful than law, and that sometimes the bravest thing a soldier could do was refuse to follow orders. Lily had given him 7 years of purpose, joy, and hope in a galaxy consumed by endless war. He would give her whatever time remained, no matter the cost. As Lily fell asleep that night, her small hand resting on his forearm, Vexthor stared out at the stars and wondered how much longer their borrowed peace would last. The security patrol arrived exactly 12 minutes after the emergency beacon went silent. Tyler watched through the observation window as their sleek vessel docked with the station, its polished hull reflecting the cold starlight. Everything about them screamed official authority, from their crisp uniforms to the way they moved with military precision through the airlock. Captain Reeves led the team. She was tall and imposing, with gray streaks in her hair that suggested decades of service. Her eyes swept across the maintenance bay with the kind of practiced assessment that came from seeing too many emergencies. Behind her, 3 officers fanned out, their hands resting on the weapons at their sides. Tyler stepped forward, still cradling the now sleeping alien child against his chest. The baby had finally exhausted itself from crying and had drifted off about 10 minutes ago. Its tiny body rose and fell with each breath, completely trusting in the stranger who held it. Reeves stopped in her tracks when she saw them. Her expression shifted from professional concern to something harder to read. Surprise maybe. Or recognition. She raised one hand and her team immediately halted their advance. "You're the maintenance worker," she said. It wasn't a question. Tyler Chin, according to the station manifest. He nodded, acutely aware of how he must look. His uniform was still stained with dried blood from the Vrax attack. His face probably showed every bit of the exhaustion he felt. And here he was, holding an alien infant like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Yes, ma'am," he replied quietly, keeping his voice low so he wouldn't wake the baby. "I'm the one who sent the distress signal." Reeves moved closer, her gaze fixed on the child. The other officers exchanged glances behind her, their body language tense. One of them whispered something into a communication device, but Tyler couldn't make out the words. "That's a Keltharian infant," Reeves said, stating the obvious. "Where are its parents?" Tyler's throat tightened. "Dead. There was a Vrax raiding party. They attacked about 3 hours ago. I managed to hide, but the others didn't make it. This little one was the only survivor besides me." The captain's jaw clenched. She knew what the Vrax did. Everyone in the galaxy knew their reputation. They were scavengers and killers, taking what they wanted and leaving destruction in their wake. Keltharian settlements were particularly vulnerable because their people valued peace over military strength. "I see," she said after a long moment. "And you've been caring for the child since then?" "Someone had to," Tyler answered simply. "It was scared and hurt. I couldn't just leave it alone." One of the officers, a younger man with nervous eyes, spoke up. "Captain, protocol says we need to contact Keltharian authorities. They'll want to know about this immediately. And we should probably take the child into protective custody until we can arrange transport." Tyler's arms tightened instinctively around the baby. The movement was subtle, but Reeves caught it. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she studied him. "You've bonded with it," she observed. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. He didn't deny it. "I've been taking care of it for hours, making sure it's fed and warm and safe. Yeah, I guess I have gotten attached." The baby stirred in his arms, making a small sound that was almost like a purr. Its tiny hand reached up and grasped Tyler's finger, holding on with surprising strength for something so small. The gesture was unconscious, done in sleep, but it spoke volumes about trust. Reeves watched this interaction with an unreadable expression. Behind her, the other officers were clearly uncomfortable. They kept glancing at each other as if waiting for someone to make a decision about what to do next. "Do you know what you're holding?" Reeves asked suddenly. "Do you understand the significance of what's happened here?" Tyler looked down at the sleeping infant, then back up at the captain. I'm holding a baby who lost everything. That's all I need to know. That's not all, Reeves corrected him. She stepped even closer, lowering her voice. Keltharian infants imprint on their caregivers during extreme trauma. It's a survival mechanism built into their biology. When they face life-threatening danger, they form an unbreakable attachment to whoever protects them. This child has imprinted on you. The words hung in the air between them like a physical weight. Tyler processed this information slowly, understanding dawning on his face. That explained why the baby had calmed so quickly in his arms. Why it had stopped crying when he spoke. Why it now clung to him even in sleep. What does that mean? He asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Reeves sighed. It means this situation just became incredibly complicated. Kes couldn't stop his hands from shaking as he encrypted the video file one more time. He was a low-ranking communications specialist in the Coalition military, barely 20 cycles old, and what he was about to do would probably get him executed for treason. But he couldn't unsee what he'd witnessed in that crystal cave. He couldn't unhear the words that human girl had spoken with such calm conviction. And most importantly, he couldn't ignore the feeling in his gut that told him the galaxy needed to see this. The patrol captain had ordered complete communication silence about the incident. The official report would say they found nothing unusual on Thessera 9, just empty caves and worthless crystal formations. Vex Thor and the girl would be quietly arrested, processed, and eliminated according to protocol. Nobody would ever know they existed. That's how the Coalition handled embarrassing problems that didn't fit the official narrative. But Kes had made a copy. His clawed fingers hovered over the transmit button for nearly 10 minutes before he finally pressed it. The file shot out across unsecured channels, bouncing through relay stations, spreading like wildfire through both Coalition space and the few remaining human networks. There was no taking it back now. Within 6 hours, the video had been viewed over 2 million times. Within 12 hours, that number jumped to 50 million. By the end of the first day, it seemed like every being with access to a communication device had seen the footage of a human child standing fearlessly beside a dragon warrior, calmly asking why mercy wasn't part of their military protocol. The reaction was immediate and explosive. On the Coalition core world of Thalaxis Prime, a mother named Velshera watched the video 3 times before she made a decision that surprised even herself. She'd lost her son in a human attack 5 years ago, and she'd carried that hatred like armor ever since. But watching that little girl speak about compassion while standing beside the dragon who'd raised her, something cracked in Velshera's heart. She posted a response that went viral within hours. I've spent 5 years hating all humans for what happened to my son. But this child didn't kill him. The war killed him. How many more children on both sides have to lose their families before we admit this has to stop? Her post sparked a movement. Other parents, other families who'd lost loved ones to the endless conflict, began speaking out. They organized peaceful protests in major Coalition cities, holding signs that said things like, "Our children deserve peace," and "Honor means protecting the innocent." The Coalition government tried to shut down the demonstrations, but there were too many people in too many places. The anger and grief that had been building for decades finally found a direction that wasn't just more violence. On the human side of the conflict, the response was even more intense. The scattered remnants of humanity's forces were spread across dozens of resistance cells, barely coordinating with each other, just trying to survive another day. Most humans hadn't seen a child in years. The war had made safe places to raise families almost impossible to find. Watching that girl, alive and healthy and educated despite everything, reminded them what they were fighting for in the first place. A human commander named Admiral Rebecca Foster was reviewing tactical reports when her communications officer burst into her quarters with a tablet. "Ma'am, you need to see this right now." Foster watched the video in silence, her jaw clenched tight. She'd been fighting this war for 15 years, and she was so tired she could barely remember what peace felt like anymore. But here was proof that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy wasn't completely broken. If an enemy soldier could raise a human child with love and teach her about honor and mercy, then maybe there was still hope for a real ceasefire. "Get me a secure line to Coalition diplomatic channels," Foster ordered. "I don't care how many layers of bureaucracy we have to cut through. Someone on their side has to be as tired of this war as we are." Her staff thought she'd lost her mind. The Coalition didn't negotiate with humans. They never had. Every peace offer in the past 20 years had been rejected or used as a trap. But Foster was done playing by the old rules. That video changed something fundamental, and she was going to take advantage of it before the moment passed. Meanwhile, the Coalition leadership was in complete panic mode. Emergency sessions were called. Military intelligence tried desperately to trace the video's origin and discredit it as propaganda. Official spokespersons went on public channels claiming the footage was fabricated, that the girl was actually a sophisticated android designed to manipulate public opinion, that Vexthor was a traitor who'd been brainwashed by human technology. But nobody believed the official statements. The video was too raw, too real. You couldn't fake the way that child looked at her dragon guardian with such obvious trust and affection. You couldn't manufacture the weariness in Vexthor's voice when he explained why he'd saved her life. The authenticity came through in every frame, and people across the galaxy recognized truth when they saw it. The protests grew larger. Coalition soldiers began refusing orders to fire on peaceful demonstrators. 3 minor planetary governments officially called for immediate ceasefire negotiations. The pressure was building from every direction, and the leadership couldn't contain it anymore. On day 4 after the video's release, Admiral Foster received an encrypted message through back channels. It was brief and cautious, but it was there. "We're listening. What are your terms for a preliminary meeting?" Foster stared at those words for a long moment before she allowed herself to feel the smallest flicker of hope. This wasn't peace, not yet. But it was the first real conversation between the two sides in over a decade. And it had all started because one young soldier decided to share a video, and one little girl asked a question that nobody had bothered to ask before. "Why don't you practice mercy?" Back on Thessalonine, Lily and Vexthor had no idea that their story was spreading across the stars. They were being held in a secure coalition facility, separated from each other, waiting to learn their fate. Lily sat in her cell, practicing the meditation techniques Vexthor had taught her, trying not to be afraid. She didn't know that millions of beings were protesting for her freedom. She didn't know that her words had sparked something that looked like it might actually change the galaxy. All she knew was that she'd told the truth, and whatever happened next, at least she'd stayed true to the lessons her dragon father had taught her. Sometimes that's all you could do. Tell the truth, stand firm, and hope that somewhere out there someone was listening. As it turned out, the entire galaxy was listening. And for the first time in 20 years, they were hearing something other than the sounds of war. The Keltharian High Council chamber was nothing like Tyler had imagined. He'd expected something grand and intimidating, all marble columns and golden thrones. Instead, he found himself in a circular room with walls that seemed to be made of living crystal. The material pulsed with soft light, changing colors based on the emotions of those present. Right now, it glowed a deep amber, reflecting the tension that filled the space. 12 council members sat in a perfect circle around the room's perimeter. They wore robes of varying shades, each color representing a different region of their homeworld. At the center of the circle stood Tyler, still holding the baby who refused to leave his arms. Captain Reeves stood beside him, her presence a small comfort in this overwhelming situation. The child had grown in the weeks since the attack. Not much, but enough that Tyler could see the changes. Its scales had deepened to a richer blue, and its eyes now tracked movement with clear intelligence. It recognized him instantly whenever he entered a room, reaching out with those tiny arms and making happy chirping sounds that melted his heart every single time. Elder Moratek spoke first. She was the oldest member of the council, her scales faded to almost white with age. Her voice carried the weight of centuries. "Human Tyler, do you understand why you have been summoned before us?" He nodded, his mouth dry. "You want to know what happens to the baby? To your people's child." "Not just any child," another council member interjected. "This one was younger, with scales that shimmered like polished emeralds. This infant is of the royal bloodline, the last surviving member of the Thelkara family. What happens next will determine the future of our entire species." Tyler's heart hammered in his chest. He'd known the baby was important, but royalty? That added a whole new level of complexity to everything. He looked down at the small creature in his arms, who gazed back at him with complete trust. The baby had no idea that the fate of nations rested on its tiny shoulders. Moratek continued, her ancient eyes fixed on Tyler. "Our people have been at war with the Vrax Confederation for 3 generations. Countless lives lost on both sides. Entire planets reduced to ash. And all because of a cycle of revenge that neither side knows how to break." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. The crystal walls shifted to a darker red, reflecting the pain of remembered losses. "But you," she said, pointing one clawed finger at Tyler, "you have done something extraordinary. You saved our last royal heir when you had every reason to flee and save yourself. You cared for this child with tenderness and devotion, asking nothing in return. You are human, a species known throughout the galaxy for your emotional capacity and your stubborn refusal to give up on those you love." Tyler shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what anyone would do. The baby needed help. No, Moratek said firmly. Most beings would not have done what you did. They would have seen an alien infant and felt no connection. They would have left it to die or at best handed it off to authorities and walked away. But you bonded with this child. You became its protector. And in doing so, you've given us an opportunity we never expected. Another council member stood. This one was middle-aged, with battle scars visible beneath his ceremonial robes. His voice was gruff but not unkind. The Vraks attack because they believe we are weak. They see our commitment to peace as cowardice. They think we have no warriors, no one willing to fight and die for our young. He walked toward Tyler, studying him with sharp eyes. But they didn't account for you. A human maintenance worker with no military training, no weapons, no reason to risk his life. Yet you stood between our royal heir and certain death. You hid for hours while Vraks hunters searched for survivors. You protected this child with everything you had. Tyler remembered those terrifying hours all too clearly. The sound of Vraks' boots on metal floors. The alien voices speaking in their harsh, guttural language. The way his heart had nearly exploded from fear every time they came close to his hiding spot. He'd been certain they would find him. Certain they would kill both him and the baby. But somehow, impossibly, they'd survived. We've been in negotiations with the Vraks leadership, Moratek continued. News of what you did has spread across the galaxy. The story of a human who saved a Keltharian royal child has captured imaginations everywhere. Even among the Vraks there are those who see it as a sign. A proof that some bonds transcend species and politics. She gestured to a holographic display that materialized in the center of the room. It showed news reports from dozens of different planets and species. Tyler saw his own face repeated over and over, along with images of him holding the baby. The headlines were in languages he couldn't read, but the sentiment was clear. His story had touched something deep in people across the stars. The Vraks War Council has agreed to a ceasefire, another elder announced. On one condition. Tyler felt his stomach drop. He knew what was coming before the words were spoken. They want to meet you, Moratek said. They want to see the human who risked everything for an alien child. They believe that if such compassion exists in the universe, perhaps there is hope for peace after all. Your presence at the peace talks has become essential. Without you, the ceasefire will collapse. The baby cooed softly, oblivious to the monumental decision being discussed. It grabbed at Tyler's collar with its tiny claws, playing with the fabric like it was the most interesting thing in the world. What if I say no? Tyler asked quietly. What if I just want to go home and forget any of this ever happened? The council members exchanged glances. The crystal walls flickered between colors, uncertainty made visible. Then war continues, Moratek said simply. More children die. More families are destroyed. The cycle of violence continues for another generation, perhaps longer. We cannot force you to help us. You are not our subject. You owe us nothing. She leaned forward, her aged face showing every year of her long life. But I think you already know what you're going to do. I see it in the way you hold that child. In the way you've refused to let anyone else care for it, even when offered. You've already made your choice, haven't you? Tyler looked down at the baby one more time. Those bright, intelligent eyes stared back at him. In the weeks they'd spent together, he'd learned to read its expressions. Right now it was content. Safe. Happy. Because it trusted him completely. He thought about his small apartment back on Earth. His quiet life fixing broken equipment and avoiding complications. He could go back to that. Pretend none of this had ever happened. Let someone else deal with galactic politics and peace negotiations. But he'd never be able to forget those eyes. Never stop wondering what happened to this small life he'd saved. Never know if his refusal had condemned countless others to death and suffering. I'll do it, he said, his voice stronger than he felt. I'll go to the peace talks. I'll meet with the Vraks. Whatever it takes to give this little one a chance to grow up in a peaceful galaxy. The crystal walls exploded with light, shifting through every color of the spectrum before settling on a brilliant gold. The council members rose as one, their faces showing relief and gratitude that transcended language. Moratek approached Tyler and placed one clawed hand gently on his shoulder. You have our eternal gratitude, Tyler of Earth. History will remember this day. The day a simple human maintenance worker became the bridge between worlds. The day one act of compassion changed the course of galactic events. Tyler shifted the baby to a more comfortable position, feeling the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. He was just a guy who fixed broken things. But maybe, just maybe, he could help fix something much bigger than machinery. Maybe he could help fix the broken trust between entire civilizations. The baby chirped happily and snuggled closer to his chest, completely unaware that it had just witnessed a turning point in history.